The 67 Figure Show, Episode 9. Ready? Let's hit it.
Broadcasting from the Valley of the Sun outside Phoenix, Arizona, this is the 6 to 7 Figure Show. Tired of working so hard and having no time? Take your 6-figure practice and turn it to a thriving 7-figure enterprise. And now, your host, author, speaker, mentor, and strategist, Frank Bria.
Welcome to the 6 to 7 Figure Show. I'm your host, Frank Bria. Today, we are going to focus on creating your authority. And that means having a platform so that your voice gets out in the world. We're going to talk about how to do that, how to figure out which platform is going to match you best, and the pluses and minuses of each option, and the timing on when you should do that. So that's what we're going to focus on today. I'm going to be teaching you everything you need to know about that in this episode, but if you want to talk about it and you want to engage in an offline conversation about that, then the place you need to be is 7 Figures Plus. That's our free Facebook group. There's 2 ways that you can get an invitation to that free group. First, you can go to frankbria.com, right smack in the middle of the page. Step 2, it says, join us at 7 Figures Plus. Just click there, get yourself a free invitation. Or come on to Facebook and just search for 7 Figures Plus and ask to join, and we will invite you to the party, but that's where it's all happening. So you want to be there to have the discussion about creating your authority. That's what we're talking about all this week. And then later on this week, I'm going to broadcast a coaching session, a hot seat session we have with an entrepreneur who is trying to create their own authority, and we're going to walk through these very things in their own business. So without further ado, let us get started. What does it take for you to become an authority? That's a really good question. A lot of people want to know that because there's a lot of talk about how you need to become an authority in your space in order to get the credibility that you need. So authority is given to you by your audience based on the value that you provide and the number of people that you reach. I mean, quite frankly, you can be providing huge value to like 5 people, and that may be really great for them, but it's not it doesn't make you a category authority, okay? You really do need to have some reach. And this is actually one of the things where people get stuck in this transition from 6 to 7 figures. 6 to 7 figures, you have a network, you have a group of people that you know, it's your Rolodex, they respect you, but you need to grow beyond that, far beyond that, in order to become a category authority that is recognized as such. Okay, and that takes some work, and it takes some doing. It doesn't happen automatically. I mean, I'll give you an example. Okay, I was working in the banking analytics space for like 15 years, and without doing any of the things that we're going to be talking about today, to become a category authority in that space took me like a decade. I mean, seriously, it took me like a decade to get there, even though I was probably one of the 5 people in the world who understood the science that we were teaching and that we were talking to banks about, okay? But I wasn't recognized as a category authority until I actually took the steps that I'm going to talk to you about today. So it's really important that you just don't get it by continuing to be really good at what you do. You actually have to take positive steps forward to become an authority, okay? So let's talk about what it is you need to become an authority. First of all, you need a system. Okay, it's not enough to say I'm an authority in marketing, or I'm an authority in health, weight loss, in health, in living healthy. Okay, you need to have a system. Okay, and that system is essentially the whole of what you have been teaching people for a long time. So if this is not new for you, if you've been doing this for a while, you may actually think you might have a system. Or you may think that the system you have is the same system everybody else has. Or worse yet, you may think that you don't have a system at all because every single time a new person comes to you, you're just so good, you kind of like just help them directly, okay? But these are things we're going to have to move past in order for you to become a category authority. We need you to have a very well understood system. And that system needs to be the thing which helps your audience get to where they go. Okay, so remember back in episode 1, we talked about the one big problem that you solve and the one big result, the one big benefit you give. You need a system that solves the pain point and delivers the benefit. Okay, so you need to think about that. And I'm not going to talk about that too much today. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but that is one of the pieces that you need. But the other piece that you need, and the part that I think most people kind of think comes on its own, or you kind of push it off into the future, you think I don't need this now, is you need a platform. And that's really what we're going to spend our time talking about today. You need a platform for your voice and your system. Now, what do I mean by platform? Platform can mean a couple of different things, but I'll tell you the typical ones. A book is a platform. A podcast is a platform. A speech or speeches is a platform. Even webinars are a platform. Okay? But if you want to make that leap from 6 to 7 figures, you want to hit 7 figures, you're going to need one of these things, if not multiples of them, if not all of them. Okay? I mean, I think actually a true category authority is all of those, has one of all of those. Most of the 7-figure entrepreneurs who are in the service industry that I can think of have at least a book, if not speeches and webinars and everything else. Okay? So you should think about that. Now, what order do they come in? Well, that kind of depends on you, and we're going to talk about the pluses and minuses of those. But I want you to think very carefully about books, podcasts, and podcasts could also be other broadcast medium, audio broadcast medium. I mean, it could be a video podcast. It could be a YouTube platform. It could be live broadcast, Periscope, whatever. But you got to have something that's consistent. It's considered a platform. It's not good enough to like dip your toe in and do one. Okay, so for example, if you just do one webinar, it's not a platform. If you do one Periscope broadcast and then quit, it's not a platform. Okay, that's a platform. And notice that's very different than, say, a video series that you use as part of a lead magnet. Okay, that's not a platform because it's not getting out into the world. It's not readily accessible to everybody. It's only accessible to those people who register for your funnel and kind of go through it once and you're done, right? So it's a little bit different when we talk about speeches or books or podcasts and even webinar series, because even though you have to sign up and register for a webinar, they're going over, you're repeating it over and over and over again. Okay. And so someone might actually come to multiple ones of those, right? So you need to think about which one kind of fits you best. But the thing is that you'll need one, and you need one very quickly if you want to make a transition from 6 to 7 figures. So just reflecting back to the overall framework of how you get from 6 to 7 figures, right? You need a platform first, and you need to build a platform, and you need to leverage that platform, okay? If you haven't thought about writing a book, you really should. You really should think about it seriously, and get some help writing it, but it doesn't mean you have to have a publisher. You can self-publish and still be successful at this, but you probably do need some help. You need some help making sure the topic is right and the and everything you're doing is right. There's a lot of places you can go. You can go get a coach. You can go sign up for publishing school, self-publishing school. Like Chandler Bolt has one that I think is terrific. Okay, or you can go get a book coach. My friend and colleague Ann Sheybani does a Build Your Book camp, where she teaches entrepreneurs how to build their own books, okay, and use it to build your business. I have multiple colleagues who help edit and style and all sorts of things once your book is ready for editing. But you need to get some professional assistance to push that through. But it's something you should really focus on because, again, there just aren't a lot of really successful entrepreneurs that do not have a book. And you don't want to be on the exception end of that spectrum. Okay. Now, writing a book isn't as complicated as you might think it is. And it's definitely not something you have to like wait until you've got like a year to work on it. It doesn't have to be like that, especially if you're working with somebody. But there are ways of getting your book out as more quickly. And in fact, I happen to be a fan of get it out as fast as possible. I think some of my colleagues who do a lot of work with book coaching and editing and stuff would be a little horrified by that. But I happen to think that something is better than nothing. And if you're ready to start building a platform, that's a great way to do it. Now, let's talk a little bit about each of these different formats and where you can use them and where you probably shouldn't use them. That's the next thing I want to focus on. But remember, what we've talked about so far is that you're going to need a system, and you're going to need to pick one or more of these platform pieces. And we're going to talk about which ones fit your business next. Let's talk about each of the different ways that you can build your platform and what the pros and cons are. Okay, let's start with book, because that's sort of the most common one. I'll be honest with you. I think book is probably the first and most important thing that you can put out there. Okay, why? Well, because it's easy enough to do, and it still gives you so much credibility. Compared to some of the other things that are out there. Okay, again, podcasts and webinars, lots of people do them. Still, even though it's so much easier today to write a book than it used to be and to publish a book than it used to be, it is still rarely done. And having a published book, not ebook, published book is a huge, huge component of that. So a lot of people come up to me and they say, Frank, I'm a six-figure entrepreneur. I do pretty well. I don't have a list. I'm booked up pretty well, but it's all one-on-one work, and it's all my network, and I get referrals and all that good stuff. What's the first thing I should do to help push me to the next level? And almost always, without fail, I'll ask a couple of questions about who their audience is and how far along they are and how much they know about this stuff. It's write a book. Almost always that should be your number one thing. Now, a lot of people try some other things first, and we're going to talk about those. But you should start planning your book today. Seriously. If you have not started planning to write a book, you should write a book. And again, a lot of people go, books just doesn't work in my market and my audience. It's just not really a thing. I don't think there's enough here to work with. That's garbage. I literally have not talked to a single entrepreneur where I could not find a way to make a book work in their market. I mean, for Pete's sakes, do you know what one of the top bestsellers on Amazon a few months back was? It was about storage, self-storage. There was a book on self-storage, okay? You think of something more commoditized than self-storage, and a guy had a book out there about it. I don't remember the author's name, but I saw it, and I was like, go you, like bestseller, nice job. So if you think your market or your product or your service is so commoditized that a book wouldn't work, I assure you that's not true. I would be willing to bet you that there is a really good opportunity for you to have a book in your market. So you should think about that very seriously. Okay. Now, cons. It is a little tougher to do on your own. You can do it on your own, but again, I would get training, especially on the marketing side. I mean, I think this is what usually happens when people start to write a book without any help. Okay, they sit down at a blank, they open up Word or Mac, whatever Word or whatever you guys on Macs are using. You can notice I'm not a Mac user. To write, and you just start typing. You start like telling a story or typing or whatever, and you're like, "Woo, done with chapter 1." I remember talking to somebody who was writing a book, and that's what they did. They were like, "Okay. Chapter 1, I'm done." And then I went out and tried to get people to look at chapter 1, and they hated chapter 1, so I'm going to go back and rewrite chapter 1 again. No, don't do that. It's just not the way to write a book. Okay. In a week or two, we're going to talk specifically about books, and then I will help guide you through that process a little better. But generally speaking, there is a process. And it's not to just sit and write. And if you blow the process, you're going to waste a lot of time. In fact, you may never finish your book. So do get some training. And then, when you're done with the book, you want to get a good editor. And a lot of people are kind of like, well, I'll just go onto Elance and get someone to make sure the spelling and grammar is correct. But again, you want more help. You want developmental editing. You want somebody to look at it and say, does this make sense? And you want to do it right. Then you got to market that book, okay? Because you can't just have a book and then just sit there. A lot of people are like, well, I have a book because it's a business card. Why? Why bother? I mean, why bother introducing yourself with a book? You need to have the book out and building your authority and credibility. On a scale of 1 to 10, having a book and sending it to someone who you don't know is like a 3. But having a well-known book or a bestseller book is like an 8. And you can still send it to somebody, except then you get to say, this is my best-selling book. Okay, so marketing your book is important as well. I'm not saying you're going to get rich off the sales of the book, but you do need to have a marketing plan in place so that you can actually do something with that book once it's completed. So again, having some help through that process is really important, and it is something that you probably shouldn't solo without some guidance of some kind. Okay, mentor or coach or group or training or something. Get some help. All right, let's move on. From book, I wanted to talk a little bit about podcasting. Okay. Now, podcasting is something which is a little more accessible. I mean, there's some equipment you have to get up front, but really, you don't need that much. You can do podcasting with minimal equipment. And then it's about launch and all the technical stuff about podcasting. And really, there is only one place that I'll tell you to turn for that stuff, and it's John Lee Dumas has a free podcast course. I think if you go to freepodcastcourse.com or something, that's where you're going to find that stuff. He's got the best information on how to do that. Now, however, you have to be a little bit cautious with podcasts, okay? Because remember, the point here is for you to establish authority. So the standard podcast format, standard I say, because it's probably the most popular, is interview-based, right? Where I basically get someone else, I interview them, and then say, oh, Mr. Really Successful Entrepreneur or Ms. Really Successful Entrepreneur, why don't you tell us your greatest moment? Why don't you tell us how hard it was for you to get here? You know, tell us a story about how things went wrong. Tell us your favorite book. Give us an inspirational quote. Okay, a lot of that stuff. And a lot of those things are starting to become kind of formulaic, frankly. I'm not a fan. And you have to be careful. So you have to be careful that you don't become just this blind interviewer. Okay, I mean, think about the subtle line between like a news anchor and Oprah. Okay, Oprah's doing interviews too, but she's the authority, and she brings people in as an authority. It's tough to do that. I'll be honest with you. It's not like you can just sit down at an interview and suddenly be the authority. It takes some practice. But you can do it. And of course, there's other podcast formats. I mean, this podcast you're listening to right now, we don't do interviews. Okay? I mean, there's a couple of exceptions. I got one coming in a couple of months, but you know, they're really few and far between, and they really got to mean something to the audience. All right? So, you know, there's other ways to do that, but you want to use a podcast to establish authority. So, again, the two kind of major top interview-based or topic-based podcasts. Topic-based podcast is where you teach your system. Okay, and I'll pull back the covers. I'm teaching you my system right now, right? This episode right here, we're talking about establishing a credible platform for your authority. That's part of my system, okay? Module 2, number 1, we're talking about establishing a platform for your authority. If you do an interview-based podcast, you need to be careful that the interview format you choose is your system in some way, shape, or form. So again, think about that very carefully and what that means for your business. If you have a system you're trying to teach and you have a podcast interview format you're trying to use, your interview format needs to support and teach your system in some way, shape, or form, either because you bring up these things over and over again. I'll give you an example, okay? So let's say I wanted to do an interview-based podcast. I don't, but let's say I did. And my book Scale, we got 4 keys to scale, right? So the 4 keys to scale are my system in the book Scale. If I was going to do an interview-based podcast, I would make sure that we hit those 4 keys to scale. I'd get somebody who scaled their business, and I would say, tell us how you created your scalable concept. Tell us what's your scalable business model. Tell us how you accessed your scalable market, and tell us what your scalable processes are. So bam, 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 right? I go through the system. So you need to do that too. If you just get on an interview-based podcast and just start randomly asking questions about, you know, what breakfast cereal do you eat in the morning that makes you a successful person, you're not going to be an authority. You're just not. Okay? So you've got to find something in that interview that is going to allow you to become the authority. So think about that very carefully if you decide to do a podcast. All right, moving right along. Let's talk about speeches. Speeches are awesome. I mean, if you want to be an authority, start public speaking. Absolutely. But I'll tell you, this should probably come a little bit further down the path for you unless you've got either some experience in this area or some contacts in this area. Because it does take you some time and effort to get your platform up and running for speeches. if you want some of the best training on public speaking, Michael Port is the guy. Okay. You want to take a look at his Heroic Public Speaking program. He'll teach you how to do public speaking in a way that you've not even thought about. Okay. And I don't care if you're doing keynotes. I don't care if you're doing workshops. I don't care if you're speaking at the Toastmasters. Being able to use the kinds of things he teaches you are just absolutely critical. So I'm a fan. However, you don't have to go all the way down that road to do it. But if you use speeches, there's, kind of two real basic kinds, right? Well, let's call them three basic kinds, but one is you get paid, the other is you don't. Okay, but there's two ways to not get paid. If you get paid, that's a business. That's the speaking of business. The business of speaking, and honestly, that is a tough place to be in the beginning. It's a great place to end up, and I highly recommend it for everybody if you like public speaking. But it's a tough place to crack into. So let's focus on the speak for free piece. Okay, two different ways. One is the sell from the stage model, and the other is the just, give value away model. And they're both valuable. Now, I'm not a fan of crappy sell from the stage, like just really, in your face sell from the stage with high pressure tactics and make it seem like a timeshare presentation. Okay. No offense, timeshare salesmen out there, but sometimes that can get a little out of control. So you want to make sure that, if you're selling or how you're providing value, you're doing it with integrity and you're really honestly providing value. If you are trying to sell from the stage, that means you have a product, and at the end you are announcing that you have a product and it's for sale. If you're just providing value, you still have to have some call to action and still some invitation for people to connect with you, although it's going to be much less in your face. Okay. So those are two things that you need to think about when you're talking about speaking, but I think it does fall a little bit further on the end of the scale. One last thing, webinars. Webinars, a lot of people don't think of this as an authority platform, but it really is. I believe that if you have a high-ticket offer that you are selling, and by high-ticket I mean more than like $1,000, you should be using webinars in your sales process in some way, shape, or form. And by the way, if you're not selling something for more than $1,000, you should be. Okay, so everyone should therefore have webinar in their quiver. However, you might find that for you personally, it shows up a little bit later in the process, or you might do like a video series to replace a webinar, or whatever you want to do. Or you might record something and make it an evergreen webinar. It's up to you. But using webinars effectively to tell stories is really important, and it does establish authority. I mean, when you get 100, 200, 300 people on a webinar and they're listening to you, you are the authority figure, period. Now, you can ruin that authority by running a crappy webinar, but and by that, I don't mean just the technological glitches, because sometimes that happens, but you can run a crappy webinar and still have it work well, because you're doing things not in integrity, or you're manipulating, or you're just plain boring people, which, I mean, I've turned off webinars because they've been boring. I give you a couple of minutes, and if it's just, I can't listen to this, then I move on. So think about webinar and where that might fit in. But these are all the opportunities that you have for a platform piece, and think about where they fit into the long-term scheme of things. But book, podcast, speeches, and webinars are really good ways to establish a platform of authority. Wrapping up, creating your authority is all about your system. Because like I said at the beginning, you need a system. So, how do we talk about your system? You need to be able to take everything that you do and teach and wrap it up into sections, okay? So, there's a couple of places to start. First of all, if you have a pretty good idea in your head about what that system might be, you might try to create steps out of it. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. If you were sitting down with somebody and they were interviewing you, like, how do you get your big benefit that you do? No, and I really want to know, like, step 1, step 2, how do you do it? Now you can write this stuff down, and that becomes part of your system. Each of those parts you're going to break down into sub-pieces, okay? And what makes sense for a starting system is to kind of look at 3 to 5 steps, generally, to get from beginning to end. If you have more than 5 steps, then two things. Either, the benefit you're trying to get is quite complex and you might want to break it up, or some of the steps are really closely related to each other and they might be minor. But if you think of like 3 to 5 major steps of getting from here to there, they become the basis for your system. And a lot of people who do courses and stuff like that will call these modules. These become the main pieces. Now, sometimes it's not steps. Sometimes it's phases or groupings of things. Okay, so for example, when I wrote my book Scale, there were 4 keys of scale. And those 4 keys weren't in steps necessarily. I mean, it's not like they went 1, 2, 3, 4, but they were 4 different categories of things that you would need to do. And, you're going to iterate through them and work on them at different times. So your system might look like that as well. And if you're sitting there thinking, well, hey, every single time I have a client, it's a brand new thing. I got to listen to what they want. I got to figure out where they are. I got to help them work it through. Then you got some work to do, frankly, because first of all, there is a system hiding in there. Okay, actually, I've spent a lot of time talking to entrepreneurs that tell me they don't have a system, and I've helped them work through what their system is. But there is a system in there, but you're going to have to think it through. And in some cases, you might have to simplify it a little bit. So if literally everyone you've been working with really is very different, you might actually want to niche down a little bit more and find a group of people that do feel very similar. Or you might find that the things you do, they might be different for everybody, but really they kind of roll up into some general category. So you're going to want to really spend some time thinking about this. And this isn't easy by any stretch of the imagination. You should probably get some help brainstorming, either with a friend or a mentor or a mastermind group or a coach or someone to help you work this through. Because if you nail this, this is the beginning of everything. Now, I want to talk to you about a couple of common things that trip people up. One big thing that I hear people say is, I do have a system, but it's the same system everyone else is using, so whatever, it's not that interesting. This is what I like to call the curse of knowledge. And actually, a lot of people use this term, but now I've kind of adopted it too. This is where you are so good at what you do that you think the things you know are obvious. But they're not. I mean, they may be obvious to some other people, but they're not going to be obvious to everybody. And maybe they're not obvious to your market. And you probably know this deep down inside. I mean, when you talk to your clients and you teach them something and they don't know it, they're like, oh. I was talking to a colleague of mine, Matt McWilliams, actually. He does joint venture launches for people. And he was telling me that a lot of times he'll run into prospective clients that don't even know what an opt-in is. And, we kind of go, how would you not know what an opt-in is? But you know what? There's a lot of people who don't. And especially in my market where I talk to people who never had to do any kind of internet-based marketing before, they don't know what an opt-in is. So don't overestimate the knowledge of your market. Okay, just because it's obvious to you doesn't mean it's obvious to everybody. And your system doesn't have to be unique. In fact, I would argue that there's rarely a unique system. It's your system, you can teach it. Your intellectual property. Okay, you're going to put your own spin on it. So that's something that you need to think very carefully through, that you don't get stuck in this place where you think, it's obvious, everyone knows this stuff. Okay? Number 2, do not boil the ocean. That's a term we used to use in mathematical and statistics when we were solving problems in management consulting, where we would say, oh, well, I can solve this problem, but I can also solve this one and this one and this one and this one and this one. And if I do it big enough and broad enough, I'll solve all the problems that you have. Okay? We call that boiling the ocean because it's like, trying to boil the entire ocean rather than just scoop out a cup of water out of the ocean and boil it. So don't try to boil the ocean. Your system doesn't need to solve all of your clients' problems all at once. If you can solve multiple problems, great. That means you got multiple systems and you have a lifetime of stuff you can teach. That's terrific. But don't try to sell that off the top, because if it's too big and too broad, it looks like a bridge too far for your clients. They think, oh, well, I can't get there. So in some sense, this kind of comes back to that one big problem that you're solving and the one big benefit. Again, one of the reasons why I say one big benefit. And everybody comes back to me and goes, well, I actually do multiple things for people. I don't care. I want you to pick one and get really good at that one big thing. And usually if you stick with one, it's simple enough. But in case your, quote, system is so complicated that it has too many pieces and parts to it, you'll start scaring people off. Okay, so you have to be careful about that. You don't want it to be overly complicated. So think about, scale down, focus on one thing, and make yourself really good at that. And get some help to write this down on a piece of paper. Go find a friend, brainstorm with a colleague or a partner or a coach. Okay, but get it down on paper, because that system is going to be a basis for your podcast, for your book, for your speeches, for your webinars. I mean, think about it. What a lot of people get stuck, like, what am I going to write about? You're going to write about your system. Duh. You want to teach, you want to sell. You're going to write about your system. Okay? Well, what's my podcast going to be about? It's going to be about your system. And if you're going to interview people, your interview format is going to be your system. Well, what am I going to give speeches on? Well, you're going to give speeches on your system so that people see your system and then want to work with you to help implement that system. Well, what are these webinars going to do? You're going to teach your system. Okay, you get the point? I think I'm making myself clear. And if you're stuck saying to yourself, well, if I teach my system and I give my system away and I speak about my system and teach it on webinars and write it in books, well, there'll be nothing for anyone to buy from me anymore. And that's where you have to stop thinking small about the world and the audience. That's scarcity thinking. That's not abundance thinking. People aren't going to buy from you unless they're sure that you have something of value to offer. And if you really want to build a business where people are attracted to you and want to buy from you, you're going to teach the system to them. And they're going to go, wow, that was awesome. And I got all of that for free. Imagine what it'd be like if I actually paid that person. Or, wow, this stuff is awesome. I totally could put this into place, but man, I need some help because it is really hard to do this by myself. Well, who else am I going to go get except the person who created the system? See the difference? Rather than, ooh, it looks like there might be a really cool system there, but I don't know enough to actually do it, and he wants me to pay him for it in order to reveal the rest. Yeah, that's not helpful. Okay, that's not a good place to be. It's not going to attract ideal clients, right? You're still going to be chasing people because you're going to be running after people going, hey, didn't you get part of my system? Isn't it cool? I can give you the rest. That's a very different sales mentality than where you want to be. Okay, so again, you got to have a system. Just because you think it's obvious doesn't mean it's obvious to everybody. Because, by the way, no system is completely, oh, wow, I never thought about that before. Number 2, make sure that it's not overly complicated so that you have a way to teach it in a simple framework that gets you one big result. And your system is going to be the basis of every other piece of authority content you have. So nail it. Nail it. This is the basics. These are the basics. If you nail your system, put it out there in whatever format, it's going to help you become an authority. If you do not have a system, I don't care how many books you write, it's not going to work. This, by the way, is the difference between all of those authors out there who write books about stuff they don't know anything about. They go research it because they're trying to have 100 ebooks out there making 99 cents a piece kind of stuff. That's a totally different business model. That is not an authority business model. An authority business model, you write about your system. And it doesn't mean that there's only one book. You're going to have multiple kinds of books. I mean, think about Michael Port, Book Yourself Solid, Beyond Book Solid, right? There's 2 right there. Not to mention the fact all the other books, Contrarian Effect, the Think Big Manifesto, and now Steal the Show. I mean, there's tons of books out there from him, right? And all this core principle that he has. So you can do the exact same thing if you have a system. And that's a challenge I'll leave you with. Wow, that was a lot today, and we are out of time. But hopefully you have gotten a good glimpse into what it takes to build your authority. So go get started. Go get started building your authority. And if you want to talk about it, if you want to bounce ideas around, if you want to try to figure out, help other people find where a good platform would be for your authority, then come on to our Facebook group. It's totally free, 7 Figures Plus. That's where you need to be. It is our private Facebook group just for listeners of the show. And it's where we talk about all this stuff. Now, if you want to get it done, this week in the Scale Mastermind, we are working on creating authority. That's what we're going to talk about. That's what we're implementing. So you need to be there if you want to get this stuff done. You want to talk about it for free at our 7 Figures Plus Facebook group. Again, if you want to join the Facebook group, go to frankberea.com, right smack in the middle of the page. Step 2 says join 7 Figures Plus. Click on that, get yourself an invitation. Or come on to Facebook and just search us out, 7 Figures Plus. If you want to join the mastermind, you're going to go to Scale Mastermind. That's frankberea.com/mastermind. Okay? That's where you want to be. So, that's my invitation to you. This has been a lot of fun. In a couple of days, we're actually going to do a hot seat all about creating authority. So you're going to listen to a small business owner figure out what it takes for them to actually create a platform of authority. That's what we're going to do. And it's just in a couple of days. Thanks so much for spending time with me. I know you're busy, and it's an honor for me to have you invite me into your world for a half hour or so to teach you what I think will help you become a 7-figure entrepreneur. And with that, I wish you all the best. I'm your host, Frank Berea. This has been the 6 to 7 Figure Show. And until next time, make it happen.